Everyone, thanks for joining us this evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order and the approval of the minutes of August 24th. Do we have a motion? Mike, thank you. Ron, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Manager's report, Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight, we have our own Cumberland Author here tonight with us, Bill Kinney. And Bill, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium to kind of give us an overview of your latest endeavors.
Thank you. Can you hear me fine?
Yep. Yes.
I want to thank the manager and thank the council chair and all the other councilors for inviting me to give a presentation or an introduction to the book that I wrote about a history of Maine railroads. I use this, the reason I wrote this, by the way, is when I went through school in 8th grade, we had to study Maine history. And we don't have a whole lot of information about Maine history that's related to the economic engine that the railroads were. So that's why I wrote the book. It's doing real well. As a matter of fact, Barnes & Noble and Books of Maine are sold out. None such are sold out and they're reordered. So it's working real well. I use this photo here because this is a narrow gauge railroad that happens to be the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway up in Alna near Wiscasset. And it's kind of neat because that engine there is the last 2-foot engine that was built by the Portland Company in Portland. So it shows an example of a good steam engine. It shows an example of a car barn. That green engine you see on the right is called a yard goat. That's just a small engine that moves the cars around. So it gives you an idea of what the railroading was like in the 1800s and the early 1900s. When I wrote this book, I wanted to have it from a different perspective. It's not about individual trains. I talk about railroads and the economic engines and who benefits. Now, at the beginning, individuals were not allowed to go out and get public financing to build railroads. So it was up to the small person that ran a slate mill up in Milo or a lumbering project to find out they had to build their own railroads. So they went to what's called a narrow gauge or a 2-foot railroads instead of the 4-foot railroads because they were cheaper to build and they served the purpose. Who benefits from that? Well, of course, the people that needed it benefited from it. What's in it for me? Well, I had to look at how are we going to get the lumber that was being milled down to the ports to ship around the world. And this is kind of significant because when I ask the people where the first railroad was in Maine, I usually hear Old Town, Milford, and Bangor, and it's not. That was actually the first passenger train. The first train was a small train up in Washington County, and it was up in Baileyville, and a man up there by the name of Vance, and the town of Vanceboro is named after him, owned a whole bunch of mills up there, sawmills. He couldn't find a way, especially in the wintertime, to get the logs he needed to the mills. He couldn't find a way to get the finished lumber to the shipyard in Eastport and in Calais. So he built a railroad. Now what's kind of neat about that, for the first couple of years it was pulled by a horse, not by an actual steam engine. So what's in it for him is he had to find a way to get that to the ports to ship around the world. And if you think about Maine, it's 500 miles from the southern border to all the way up to the northern border. And there's a lot of territory to cover, and it's very sparsely populated when you get north of Bangor. So it was very hard to subsidize or to support major railroads. So what's in it for me? Well, I wanted to talk about some key players. There were 2 governors in our state's history that were very important. The first one was Joshua Chamberlain, who we know as a Civil War general, but one of the battles that he fought that's very little known is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania had the largest interchange point railroad yard for all the goods that were coming from the north that were going towards the south to support the army. He held off Lee's army there, and if he hadn't held off Lee's army there and he'd have taken over that railroad, we might have a different outcome of the war. It was that significant. When he became governor later, he got the law changed so that they could start having public financing for railroads, so they could go out and get bond issues and start building major railroads. So he was kind of significant. He also called his old boss, General Grant, said, would you come up and dedicate the Piscataquis and Old Town Railroad? which I thought was kind of neat. You had the President of the United States come up and dedicate it. The other key player as a governor was John Baldacci. When he was in the legislature, he was a member of the Transportation Committee and the Railroad Subcommittee, which is why we have Amtrak here today, by the way. And they were, the Montreal and Quebec Railroad wanted to tear up all the tracks in Aroostook County. They said, it's not profitable for us anymore, we want to do this. He saw the danger of that to the farmers in Aroostook County and northern Penobscot County and said, no, this isn't right. So he worked with the Obama administration, and they got funding to so the state bought the tracks up there, which is kind of neat now because they're running. The Canadian Pacific just bought the Montreal and Quebec Railroad, so it's now a Class 1 railroad again, so that worked. Now, when I was getting ready to write the book, I'd known John Baldacci my whole life, and his dad ran a restaurant in Bangor, and my dad ran a restaurant in Old Town, so we came from the same era and so forth. He reviewed my entire book to give me some input, he said, I want you to mention something that you didn't mention. I want you to mention 2 names that aren't in there. I want you to mention Senator Olympia Snowe. If we didn't have Olympia Snowe fighting for us in the Senate to push that through, we never would have got that funding. I also want you to mention a person named Bruce Van Note, who was his transportation guru when he was governor, who helped push the railroad through. I no more than made those changes and sent it off to the publisher, and I pick up the paper and see where Governor Mills appointed Bruce Van Note as the new transportation director. So he's still around and still active in the business. So the idea about the railroads was to get the right stuff in the right place at the right time. So this is more of an economic view of railroads and why we had it. When you look at this information, you can see we had the Grand Trunk, which came from Portland. Basically came right up through here. Matter of fact, there's a photo in the book of the terminal down in Poland's Corner. That's in there. That basically came up here, went up towards Lewiston, hung a left, and went to Canada. You had the Maine Central Railroad, who basically came up through here, went up through Cumberland Center, and that photo's in the book also. I have a input with the Historical Society that gave me some good information here, so that photo's also in the book. That basically came up and went up and hung a right and went over towards Canada. So you had them going in different directions. We also had other things that a lot of people don't realize. We had trolleys that came through the state. 90 communities in Maine had trolleys. 90. The shortest one was the Norway to Paris trolley, which went 2 miles. The longest one was the Lewiston Waterville trolley that went 142 miles. And the most popular one is the Portland Lewiston interurban trolley. That's the one that came through West Cumberland went up. That was only like 40 miles, but because of the population, that was the most popular. What's kind of neat about the trolleys is that's why we developed suburbs. Think about it. You've got people that can now get on a trolley in Lewiston, come to work in Portland for the day, and go back at night. You couldn't do that before we had the trolleys. What's also kind of interesting is when you think of the trolley lines, think of 3 things, 3 different places. The Bangor area, the Lewiston area, and the Portland area. They all had big hydro companies that had all sorts of electricity. What are we going to do with it? We're selling as much as we can. Only 15 to 20% of the homes have electricity. So they said, we'll build trolleys. And if you stop and think about it, at that time, you live on a 3-decker in Portland, Maine. There's no electricity in your home. It's hot as heck in the summer. So what do you want to do? You want to get out and do it. For 15 cents, they can get on a trolley and go to Riverton Park, Trolley Park, or they can get on a trolley and head up to Merrimeeton up in Brunswick, or they can get on a trolley and get off here at Wildwood and go to a tea room down there. So that was their way to get out for the day that was relatively inexpensive. But because of that, again, we had the suburbs created. We also had an international trolley, one of only 3 in the country, and the first one. It went from Calais across to St. Stephen, up to Milltown, New Brunswick, over to Milltown on the other side of the United States, and came back down. That was also a good commuter thing to support the paper mills and the other mills that built up there. They could commute and go to work. The trolleys went through, like I said, I talked about all the different trolley parks, that type of thing. So this is what the book is about. It's about the key players, what their interests were, how to get the right stuff to the right place at the right time. I wrote this book so that I could go around the state and talk to schools, 8th grade classes, and promote it. It's a real financial boom. I make $1.03 for every one you buy on Amazon. So it's going to be a big moneymaker for me. But anyway, I did my book launch at the Maine Narrow Gauge in Portland. That was kind of neat. I've since been up to the Waterville, Wiscasset, Farmington Railway and did a talk on the running train there. Last weekend I was up in Unity at the Belfast and Moosehead Lake Railroad and did a talk up there, which sold out, which was kind of interesting. And I was at the Trolley Museum on that terrible rainy Saturday a couple of weeks ago down there. So that's basically what the book's about. This is what it looks like. If anybody wants to buy one, they can go to historymaine.com. Not Maine History, historymaine.com, and you can order it. If anybody in Cumberland orders it this month, I will give a $3 donation to the food pantry. I did that when I did the book signing in Cumberland a little while ago. I'll give a $3 donation to the food pantry because, again, the point is to get this out as many hands as I can. The last I counted, I've sold 41 families in Cumberland the book, so that's been going pretty well with the book signings, and so it's a pretty neat, interesting thing to do. And what Kathy and I are working on our second book now, but anyway, that's another story. So have any questions anybody wants to ask?
Did you bring any books with you, Bill?
I got a few books with me, a half a dozen or so.
I'll take one.
Okay.
I'll take one, Bill, because the interurban railroad actually goes through my living room of my house, so.
You're not getting 15 cents, are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill, I'll take two, because I have a
Geez, I
friend.
hope I got enough. I don't have to run home.
Yeah.
But oh, no, never
No,
mind.
I
got
know,
more in
and
the,
I have to go to the
never mind. I
car
got a
and get
box in the car. I forgot
Oh,
about my box in the car.
Yeah, gotta
Okay.
get my wallet.
Yes, sir.
So if you come out of Cumberland Station there, down around Main Street, Lower Main Street there,
Cumberland Center, yeah?
there's a spur that came up into the center. And you can see that old railroad bed in the wintertime because the way the snow, and you can see the contours. That's the only time you can see it. I've always wondered about that. I've never found any documentation to that.
There is, it comes through there, and it also comes out partly is on the Valhalla Road, too. It's dug up there.
That's the
too.
old Grand Trunk. That's what.
Yeah, that's part of the Grand Trunk. That's the only one I'm familiar that spurred off. I did read about the guy that used to ran the tavern where Doc's is, I'm sorry, the Cumberland Food Company is now. Used to take his cattle and walk them down to Cumberland Center, up Route 9, and put them on the train. I also, last year, I went to an antique shop up in Brunswick, and I found this wooden box that said L.W. Dyer Farm, Cumberland, Maine. So I bought that to give the Historical Society if they ever get a building for them to put it in. It's in my garage now. But I bought that because I thought that was kind of neat. So I did some research on that. And that was on Wynn Road, almost up to the Falmouth line. And they used to ship butter out of there in these wooden crates. And they would ship something like 15 to 20,000 cases of that butter around the United States. And a lot of your flowers that were grown here was shipped out of there, and a lot of cattle came out of there. So this was really a big metropolis for shipping, because at that time we were more a farming community. So all the stuff congregated and was loaded on at Cumberland Center, which is, again, out Route 9, and went all around the world. I thought that was kind of interesting. Those boxes are like pallets. The boxes came back, and they loaded them up again. So I thought that was kind of neat that you could ship real butter in railroad cars. This was before they had refrigerated cars, but they had ice in there and shipped them as far away as the West Coast. So I was just amazed that they were doing that. So
On the carnations, from all the carnations.
Oh, a lot of
greenhouses
carnations.
went worldwide.
yeah, they really did.
Bill, I'm very, very impressed by your book, and I do appreciate the donation that you're making to the Cumberland Food Pantry.
It took about 5 weeks for the check to get from the Cumberland post office here, though, but he finally found it. So I think it was the post office problem, not inside the town. But
Okay. Let me ask you a question, and it's not one of the questions I asked you this evening,
Okay.
earlier. The Pony Express,
yeah,
what caused the Pony Express to go out of business?
stagecoaches.
I thought it was the railroad.
Well, the railroads that came after, but in between there were stagecoaches.
thank
That's
you.
in my next book. My wife and I are writing
Your
on.
next book, okay.
It's on historic Maine taverns and tea houses, and I talk about all the taverns and how they used to be post offices and all that sort of thing.
Does Kathy know you're doing this book?
Yeah, Kathy's name's gonna be on there first, she said.
Oh, okay.
She's doing the tea house part, and she's helping me with the taverns part. And it's nice to be married to a former librarian, because
Oh, yeah.
there's nothing any tougher than having a editor that, she said, "You write this before 3 o'clock?" Yes. Well, go back and write it again.
Surely.
On my mother's side of the family, my great-grandfather built the Casco Castle. His name was Benjamin Franklin Dunning.
Yep.
And there's a Dunning collection at the Freeport Library that my
Yes.
grandfather put together with genealogies and stuff. So if you're doing the whole resort thing, because Casco Castle was part of that
Yes.
resort area, you might find some stuff there.
Yeah, the trolley that went through to Brunswick stopped and supported that
Yeah.
too. So.
Yeah.
And it was also like at Wildwood, which was kind of neat when I was doing the research for the tea houses. They had boats that came in. They'd go to the tea houses. They would get on the trolleys and go into Portland or Brunswick and go back. So it's almost like the cruise ship stopping in
Yeah.
Portland now. So it's kind of interesting.
Any other questions of Bill?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Bill, anything else for the town manager's report?
No, I'll hold off till the end.
Oh, okay, thank you. Public discussion. Anybody here about anything that is not related to the agenda tonight? Chris?
Is it okay to remove my mask?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Never mind. I was wondering where mine went.
You wanna take something?
No, I wanted my mask. I didn't know where it went. Thank you.
We'll take yours though, Chris.
Okay. Thank you for giving me some time. For those of you that don't know me, and I know a lot of you know some about me, let me give a quick summary. I came to West Cumberland with my wife and 2 sons when they were 4 and 1 years old 32 years ago. And I've never left. This is a great place. We lived on 2 small horse farms in the Bruce Hill Road area. She still lives on one of them. We got divorced. Anyway, we soon joined the Congregational Church in Cumberland. Wow, what a great place that is. And got to know the community, and my sons took advantage of all that. You know, I grew up, I had my parents, I had my teachers, and then my Sunday school teachers. And they were like connected to God, so they're pretty important in my opinion. Anyway, my kids went to this AD 51 schools. I was on the planning board for 12 years, if anyone was paying attention. I got divorced in 2007, and Ruth still lives on that second horse farm. And I now live on Orchard Road between Double T and Terrason's Orchards, right where Orchard Road banks down towards Haskell Road and goes straight towards Gray. Great part of town. We call it Gray Fourside, which is, you know, just got to keep the four sides balanced. Anyway, I'm a lawyer. I commuted to downtown Portland for 43 years from Falmouth and Cumberland. And I'm glad to report that as of August 1st, I'm now practicing law with Thaddeus Day at 440 Walnut Hill Road, just north of Stones. So I'm fully committed to this community. So I am here to offer some public thanks to the Public Safety Department, which saved my life, and to make the town aware of a recent unflattering public report that you may not know about. So, thanks. At about 1:30 a.m. on Wednesday the 12th, I had the most bizarre thing happen to me that I'll never tell anybody, but it did. I injured myself significantly internally, and I knew I was in big trouble. I called 911, and I sat there in pain and said, geez, I don't know how long this is going to take. In what seemed like 30 seconds, I heard the ambulance pull in, and 2 great Cumberland EMTs promptly and gently loaded me onto a stretcher and into the ambulance, and off we went. and I'm reasonably sure they must have come from the West Cumberland Fire Station. And I want to thank anyone who's on the council, whoever voted to keep that where it is, if it was ever even discussed. So, they were great on the ride. One of my favorite parts was one of them smelled like horses, which I found very comforting. You know, I'm not a horse person, but I get it, it's cool. Anyway, so when I got to MMC, they stayed with me. And I was like screaming, help, help, help. And they started screaming, help, help, help. And thanks to them, I got on the emergency operating table very quickly and barely made it. So, in my view, they saved my life. Those two EMTs were Chris Kopp, you must know him,
Yep.
and a guy named Lyda Green. And I was hoping maybe they'd show up. But anyway, I want the world to know those two young men saved my life very professionally. And I don't know Mr. Green, but I was not surprised when one of them was a cop. My son Jeff's best friend growing up was Ryan Kopp, son of Bubba Kopp. And I soon got to know Ron Kopp because he had to tow my car one time. And he's an excellent town councilor. And I've heard nothing but good things about that family. So I'd like to publicly thank Chris and Lyda, and I'd like to just offer a round of applause to our EMTs. And I think it is true without knowing that this is kind of a common event for them. So, thank you. So, I want to talk about an unfortunate incident I read about involving the Cumberland Police Department. So, give me a little slack here. First of all, I'm going to use the Sports Illustrated criticism sandwich method. So I was coaching soccer trying to get smarter about it, and I read about something called a criticism sandwich. And when you're coaching soccer, and Billy's told to play the wing but decides to run around the middle of the field, you pull Billy over and you say something like, "Billy, really great hustle. You're really doing great. Thanks, coach. Remember when I asked you to stay on the wing? That means you stay on the side of the field, not the middle of the field." "Oh, yeah. All right, well, listen. Go have some fun out there, and I'll see you after the game." It's called the criticism sandwich. You start with a compliment, you give the criticism, you finish with the compliment. Works out wonders. Anyway, I'm going to do this for the police department because I got a lot more good things to say about it than bad, and I should have done it long ago. So I've been here since 1988. I learned to drive in Massachusetts. I was a horrible driver. I treated every trip as a race. I believe that as long as I went no more than 9 miles over the speed limit, I was safe from prosecution. Really bad. That's what they teach you down there. Anyway, I got some warnings and then some tickets, and always with a smile, and always because I was guiltier than sin, and I eventually straightened out thanks to state police. My younger son, Jeff, and his buddies sometimes colored a little bit outside the lines in high school. Nothing really criminal, but nothing a parent would be proud of. And a couple of times, police got involved, thankfully. And I remember Officer Tom Burgess calling me to say, "Hey, Chris, I'd like to come over and talk to you and your son." And I said, "Good. He's going to scare the pants off this kid, and he'll never do it again." Thank God Tom's smarter than I am. He came in, calm, sat down, said to Jeff, "You know you shouldn't be doing this. What's going on?" That whole de-escalation thing that's becoming more popular. He's had it for years. It's a credit. And our resource officer, Kirk Mazuzin, his little brother Scott, was my other son Scott's first friend. I know the family, all good people. And I will say also the firm I recently left represents the state police union and its troopers. And in the last 16 years, I've seen firsthand how great the vast majority of law enforcement people are. And I mean that sincerely. And I can honestly say I'd rather hang out with a bunch of cops than a bunch of lawyers, given the choice. So, Let me lead up to this a little bit. So my new partner Thad Day has been president of the Bar Association in Maine during 2020. So we have in Maine the Board of Bar Overseers, which are the people that give me my license and discipline me when I screw up. And lawyers take that real seriously. And then there's this other organization called the Maine State Bar Association, which is a trade group. Volunteer, no licenses, they organize, they disseminate, they advocate for lawyers, all that kind of stuff. It's a good organization. And so when COVID hit and people couldn't meet, Thad initiated a Zoom-type bar talk session, weekly, daily, where lawyers could sit around and talk about issues and have some social contact when they were stuck at home. And so, not surprisingly, the topic of Black Lives Matter and white privilege came up. And apparently, people on both sides of that spectrum had a fairly confusing argument. And I don't pretend to know anything about it except that I believe it's true. As a sports fan, my view of white privilege is like being born on third base and thinking you hit a home run when you reached home plate. That's how I view white privilege. And I hope this is not about white privilege. But anyway, so the Maine State Bar Association has 2,800 members. And every 3 months it publishes this periodical. It's full of news about lawyers. It's full of all kinds of stuff that you would all find boring. But those who work in the profession find it helpful and educational. 2,800 members, Fort Kent to Kittery, Eastport to Bethel. Now, in this magazine is an article written by a female attorney named Crystal Williams. She is self-described as a Christian female attorney from away, and the challenges that presents. She now works at a big fancy law firm. So this article was fascinating, but I want to get right to the point. These are her words, not mine. I found them troubling. If anyone else knows about them, I'm sure you share these feelings. But I'm sure some people don't know. She writes, quote, "When I am stopped by a Cumberland police officer because, allegedly, the small light that illuminates my license plate is out on one side, it's personal. And when that same officer sees my ACLU and Maine Law tote bags in my back seat and lets me go only to follow me till I reach my house, it's personal. And when I am stopped on my way to the gym by a Cumberland police officer who approaches my car yelling, 'Do you have a gun?' it's personal." Now, I don't know this woman, and as you may have guessed, she's also a black woman from away trying to become a lawyer in Maine. And I would find her words credible on their face only because she'd lose her license. So that bothers me. That bothers me a real lot. And if some of you know about it and haven't shared about it, shame on you. This is a big problem for our town, and I'm here to run it up the flagpole. Now, Cumberland, with its well-deserved reputation for quality schools, abundant public open space, now has a statewide reputation of having at least one racist police officer. It's a fact. People are reading about this in every county in Maine. The only good news for us is this particular paragraph buried at the end of a rather long and tedious article about intellectual questions. But nonetheless, it's there. Now, I also want to say I fully recognize that I've only read one side of the story. And I fully appreciate there's another side to the story. I'd like to find out what the other side of the story is, because right now, I don't like the story that's out there. And if there hasn't been an investigation started, it's really too late.
Mr. Chairman, the council, just for Chris's knowledge, the day the article came out, the day the council was informed about the article.
Okay,
The next day, an investigation began and is underway with another police department. So that's about all anybody up there can say at this time. It, obviously, with any investigation, when that final adjudication, if you will, becomes a part of their record, that will be available to anyone who requests it. So
well, I'm glad to
we
hear
take
that.
it very seriously, Chris. There are absolutely two sides to this story. And that will come out during the investigation, I hope. And both officers involved have voluntarily cooperated. So I would just share with you, it's, you know, like any story, there's always two sides. And there'll be more to come, I guess, down the road. But at this point, this council is not in a position to comment on a
I'm
ongoing
not asking
investigation.
for comment. I'm just sharing information. I'm really disappointed that you knew this and didn't say anything to the rest of us about it. I'm really disappointed in that.
They
These
were
allegations are
Haven't-
credible. Let me express my opinion. I would have liked to known when it happened that there's a problem. Especially now that it's out there from coast to coast in the state of Maine. I don't know how long this investigation is going to take. It shouldn't be very long. 3 incidents, 3 people. A week. You get to the bottom of it if you want to. So, let me give you a couple of bigger picture thoughts on police reform. There's nothing to do with this incident, but which everything to do with stuff that's going on in this country, and perhaps here in Maine as well. So I pay a lot of attention to people, and this particular guy over in Sweden who's an American citizen, been living there for 6 years. He sounds like a good American. And he made 2 really interesting observations about how the police works in Sweden versus the United States. In Sweden, there's the Swedish police, period. There's no FBI, well, I don't know what else. There's the Swedish police. There's no town police, there's no county police, there is the Swedish police.
Chris, I'm going to give you about 5 more minutes, and that's it, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
And you need a 4-year degree to get one, to become it. In Maine, we have the Maine State Police, the county police, the local police. Crazy, inefficient. So, more to the point. In Sweden, the police have no discretion. If you get pulled over, you get a ticket, period. If the lights go on, you're getting a ticket, period. No discussion. Everyone understands it. Those are the rules. As a result, there's very little conflict between the police and the public. In America, we have conversations. We want to know, you know, there's a whole lot of discretion by that officer. And discretion is power over people, and power in the wrong hands can be dangerous. So, Sweden, they love their cops. They know what to expect, and the people know. So I would at least ask the police chief and the town council to explore a change to maybe this more enlightened policy. Cumberland can become a leader in police reform. We'll have no fights between, our cops will have no discretion. They'll have to be straight shooters. And maybe, just maybe, if we lead the way on that, people will forget about alleged racist activity. So,
Chris, 1 minute.
police officers and attorneys are groups of people. There are bad apples in both of them. The difference is, my profession, I am required to report unethical conduct when I see it, or I lose my license. That's the game. Lawyers are publicly removed from office all the time, and it's a good thing. I cannot remember any police officer in Maine being removed publicly for bad conduct. It just doesn't happen, and it should. Now, police are public servants, and they're not our masters. One other illustration. Some revert to this culture as the thin blue line. About 10 years ago, I was given a ride home by a friend. He ran a red light in Falmouth, got pulled over. He walked out, engaged in a conversation, and came back free as a bird. I asked him what happened. He showed me a bumper sticker with a thin blue line on it. So in the real world that we all live in, at least 10 years ago, if you were smart enough to have a bumper sticker with a blue line on the back, you were immune from prosecution. That's wrong. I don't know if it still exists. I hope you guys ask the cops about it, because there are one class of people and we all belong to it. I had a state trooper tell me it was wrong for his wife to get a speeding ticket because she was married to a state trooper.
Chris, please wrap it up, okay?
I want to compliment the police before I leave. More recently, when I was abducted by aliens, for anyone knew, it was Detective Benjamin Burns who came by my house at sunrise and started looking around and reached out to my kids, and my kids felt somewhat comforted by the fact that no one knew where Dad was, but the Cumberland police were looking for him. Eventually everyone found me at Maine Medical Center. It wasn't hard to find me if you knew where to look. And I was really impressed by this, and I have never met the chief, but I respect what he's done in this town. I got a message at the hospital from Chief Charon that there was some UPS packaging piling up outside my house, that maybe I should have someone move, so I wasn't advertising to the world that there was no one home. So what I want to finish with, after some harsh words, is that I feel protected and cared for by the Cumberland Police Department. I wish it nothing but the best. If it has a smirch on its face, I hope it deals with that openly, publicly, because I have a feeling that more people are going to know about this incident tomorrow than knew about it today. And that is my purpose for coming.
Thank you, Chris.
And if anyone, well, you've already seen it. Never mind. If anyone else who's here wants to see what I was talking about, I have a copy. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on my way.
Thank you. This is still the public discussion. Anybody, please?
Chris, I think you left your mask at the podium.
Thank you.
You're
I'll
welcome.
leave my head there.
Glad you're well.
Getting old.
Please state your name and where you live.
Yes, hi, I'm Mari Balo. I live in Portland, Maine, and I'm here tonight because my partner and I are putting on a race, a trail race. And by the way, thank you for your time. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. We had run this event last year. It goes on the trails from Lowell Preserve all the way over to Knights Pond and back. And last year we had obtained permission from, we thought, everyone that we needed to. And so after last year's event, I had immediately gone back to everybody and said, hey, it was great. We had a great time. It was really fun. We'd love to do it again. Is that fine? And everything seemed to be good. Yeah, do you have it? So we had gone through that process. Unbeknownst to us, obtaining, thank you. Obtaining permission as we had done from the CCLT and the RRC, or LT, RRLT, the Royal River Conservation Trust and the Cumberland Shabig Land Trust was unfortunately not adequate, which we learned on Friday of last week, that we also should have come directly to the towns of North Yarmouth and Cumberland. So that's why we're here tonight, to let you know of this event, to answer any questions you may have about our event. We do start in Lowell. It is a 50K, so the longer kind of end of this is going to be out through Rhines Forest and over to Knight's Pond, and that, I believe, is the part that impacts your trails. We anticipate that the earliest runner might be in the area by around 8:30 in the morning, and the last runner might be leaving by 1:30 in the afternoon. That's a very wide window. We don't actually expect it to be that wide. Our event is capped at 60 people total, of which only about 30 are running the 50K, so we don't expect the impact day of to be significant. Also, because it's a trail race, people tend to spread way out, so it's not as though you're going to get a whole pack of people coming through at any one time. Ken, who's my partner, has spoken to a few of the landowners on some of the areas that we now understand are private. We've been trying to stick to marked trails only, and I think in some instances, pieces of those trails are private, and we weren't aware of that necessarily. So I know Ken has spoken to Mrs. Godsoe. Yep. And has also, part of where we come out of Rhines is up by the golf course over there, and the gentleman who owns that access road has also spoken with Ken, and we've gotten permission from both of those folks to use the trails that cross their properties. And if there are any others, it's what we'll spend some time doing tomorrow, seeing if there's anybody else that we've impacted and that we need to reach out to. So I don't know if you have any other specific questions for me, or?
Yes, I'm going to turn this over to town manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this was an honest mistake. We kind of stumbled over it when the fire chiefs were basically inspecting Knight's Pond, and somebody had mentioned to them, do you know that there was a race coming in the next 2 weeks? And there was actually, this weekend, they actually had a trail party to help work on the trails and help cut some brush and some other things that they did check in with John Jensenius about as well. So the concern I have is that the map that's shown there does go across two private properties, Fred Kinney's and Don Lee's. They have been great to work with in the past and have given permission at times for people to cross their properties, but I'm not sure where that is, and that's important to me because we don't want to negatively impact our landowners who have property adjacent to us. The other thing is Knight's Pond. It's kind of a unique animal in the sense that there are two towns involved with it, North Yarmouth and Cumberland, and 3 of you are on the joint standing committee that basically makes those decisions for Knight's Pond. North Yarmouth Selectmen are meeting tomorrow night. They expressed the same concern, and they would be willing to meet with the joint standing committee this week if we could pull it together to listen to their proposal and make a recommendation the way that you guys have set up this process to work. Where it's a small number of runners, that's understandable why I think maybe the Land Trust thought it wouldn't be an impact, because they've held events out there before, to guide the public through the parks and so forth. So I think maybe they thought this was more of an extension. We have reached out to Chris Cabot and to Penny Asherman and expressed that in the future, these type of events where they're really not generated by the town of Cumberland or the town of North Yarmouth really need to come to the elected bodies for approval. And I think that misunderstanding has been clarified. So tonight, I guess we're looking for direction as staff where you'd like to go with this. If you want to try to pull the joint standing committee together for a brief meeting, either virtually or most likely here at our town council chambers with the North Yarmouth representatives, we could try to do that in the next couple nights, or what more information you need from these folks. Typically, we also, when these type events come, we usually get a certificate of insurance, and we really haven't seen anything. We're all kind of here tonight before you, kind of throwing it out and looking for some assistance. The event is advertised and scheduled to go this Saturday. Obviously, it's a very short window, and that's why we're here looking for your direction.
If I could add, I have also requested that both North Yarmouth and Cumberland be added to our insurance rider. So I anticipate that will come through fairly quickly. Our insurance company is pretty good about that.
And that's huge. That's a huge plus.
Personally, I think the joint standing committee ought to get together as soon as possible.
The Rhines Forest, though, will need some direction tonight from you on that portion.
Okay. Discussion? Thoughts?
I know in the past, the conversation has been, what is the benefit to the town? And I'm not talking about your event, but as a general question, and specifically, I'll mention Twin Brooks, where people come in and use it for cross-country skiing. LL Bean says, go down there and use the, the town of Cumberland's facilities. So I'm hesitant to come out and say, I discourage the use of our facilities. But on the other hand, I don't want to see it overused by people who are not residents and benefactors of our community. And so, I think this is a small scale thing, but if you came through here with 500 runners, I don't think you'd get my approval or my blessing. So I think it should go to the Joint Standing Committee and let them weigh in on it.
Tom?
George?
I'm on the Joint Standing Committee, and I'm not sure is Allison on this Joint Standing now?
Allison and Mike.
Okay,
You-
good. My thought was obviously initially the potential of degradation of the trails and all of that, when at first it looked like there might be a whole lot of people bunching up and that kind of thing. But to Bob Vale's point, the fact is that Knights Pond is a pretty serene place most of the time, and you've got local people who are going to be walking those trails. I was just when I went over to check Turkey Lane, I was by the Rhines Forest area, and there must have been 10 cars lined up out there, and people are on those trails and so on. So even with a race, you can't, I guess you can minimize the impact, but you can't say it's not affecting Cumberland residents potentially in terms of their quiet enjoyment of what's a Cumberland facility. So I don't know whether that's persuasive that we shouldn't allow this, but I think we have to think a little bit about this kind of thing, and particularly with what's gone on with Twin Brooks. There have been an awful lot of use there that hasn't been sanctioned by the town. So it's something that needs to be thought about, and I think we should have a joint standing committee meeting with North Yarmouth. And I'm ready other than tomorrow afternoon, so.
Thanks, George. Allison?
I'm good. Just, is there any type of water stop? Is there any aid on the trails?
Yes,
Where would
we
that be?
have 3 aid stations and 4 checkpoints,
Okay.
of which I think there are 1 aid station and 2 of the checkpoints, I believe, are in the end of the trail that are impacting Cumberland.
Okay.
There'll only be 1 person at each of those locations, volunteer person at each of those locations. The checkpoints are incredibly small. It's really just some extra water and a person at a road crossing to make sure that the runners get across safely. The aid station itself won't be a whole lot bigger. It's just going to have water and a little bit of snacks. But we've been pretty clear with the runners that this has got to be mostly self-supported due to COVID, among other things. We've also been very clear with the runners that trails are open. They should anticipate and expect that there will be riders, walkers, and dogs out there, and that they should be courteous, be pulling up their face coverings and whatever. They're required to have them with them. So we've tried to be we're very aware of the local. I mean, I run those trails a lot myself, and I really enjoy them, and I do very much appreciate what you're mentioning about the serenity of the area, and we will have an impact. I'm not going to deny that, but certainly it's a far less impact, I think, than you might get if it were folks on mountain bikes, for instance, or any kind of that larger scale event, which we wouldn't try to do. Those trails wouldn't handle a large scale event. So.
Thank you. Bill, do you have enough guidance?
You got some more
Oh, I'm
questions
sorry.
over there.
I wanted to ask, one of the questions Bill asked you, is this a benefit race? And could you tell us more about that?
Yeah,
please?
absolutely. Yeah. So when we envisioned this initially, our thought, as it was real small when it started, our thought was that we would have folks pay a relatively small entry fee to the race, and then make a donation to a nonprofit of their choice. And that's what we've done. And again, we've done that this year. You know, I'm not sure if it's COVID or if it's that we're real successful marketers, but we have more people this year than we had last year. And so I think we've already been discussing the fact that maybe next year, assuming we review this again, that the benefactor would be a targeted benefactor, and it would be, you know, maybe split amongst the land trusts that manage the trails that we're using. But this year, as we had last year, it's everyone pays a relatively low, modest entry fee, and then everyone is required to donate at least $20 to a nonprofit of their choice.
Shirley?
So, Mr. Manager, are you looking at something that would forego, like generally when events like this happen, we have a minor mass gathering or a major mass gathering. It goes through Tammy O'Donnell, our town clerk, and there's a whole process to that. Are you
This
looking
doesn't come
to-
close to that threshold. This is the one, these are the types of things that fall through the cracks. And what's very encouraging here is they have a certificate of insurance. A lot of times people put these events together, hey, let's do this. And,
Yeah.
all of us share each other's parks. I mean,
Yeah.
we go to different parks in different towns, and that's part of basically living in the region. But when it's an organized event like this, I was really glad to hear the certificate of insurance was available, because that helps us. And if there's something that does go wrong, there's somebody that can, cover that. But Rhines Forest is its own park. You have full control over that. The quirky thing was Knight's Pond, where we share it with both communities. And I didn't want one or the other community to just say, oh yeah, go ahead, it's not a problem, when we've been really trying to give the Lands and Conservation Commission here the authority to oversee it. John Jensenius is our trail chair. He does a very good job. He's really, very much on top of things. And I think he wanted to bring to your attention that these type of things do occur. I don't think anyone is trying to stop it or discourage it, but I think it's important that you know about it. And if you're comfortable basically directing the Lands and Conservation, the Joint Standing Committee to work with the town of North Yarmouth, and you're okay with the Rhines Forest portion, then we'll try to set up a meeting in the next couple days, whether that be virtual or in person, with the town of North Yarmouth, and hopefully we can get it resolved this week.
Thank you.
Mike?
What's the participation level?
We have 60 runners total, and 30 of those would be doing the longer distance, so would be over in this end of the spectrum.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions, comments?
So send it to the Joint Standing Committee, and you're comfortable with the Rhines Forest portion
Correct.
by consensus.
Consensus.
Okay. So I'll work with Rosemary Roy, the town manager of North Yarmouth, and see if we can pull something together. You really should go to their meeting tomorrow night and plea the same. So,
Right.
and you can let them know that this council has deferred that to the Joint Standing Committee, and I'll let her know that tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next
Thank you.
year, should we
Come
yeah,
back.
do this next year? We'll
We can figure out getting the start and finish in Cumberland, so then people can go to Cumberland Food Company after, and
Yeah, actually, Cumberland Fairgrounds is looking to host us next year.
If it was at the Cumberland Fairgrounds next year, that would be awesome. So.
This is still public comments? Paul, you want to come to the microphone?
Procedural question, do we have the chance to talk on some of the items that we're having later in the meeting, or should it be now?
If you come to the mic, I can't hear you.
A procedural question, do we have a chance to speak on some of the items listed in the agenda later as they come up, or is now the only time?
You have the opportunity to speak once they come up, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Thank you. The next item is item 20-065, to set a public hearing date of September 28th on the order of discontinuance of a town way, a portion of Turkey Lane from Range Road to the snowmobile bridge. We have the attorney, town attorney. Bill, do you want to say anything?
Just almost that this is a do-over again. We are at a point tonight where we are hoping as staff and as your town attorney to get the direction that the council would like to see for this order of discontinuance. Tonight, Alyssa Tibbetts, our town attorney, is here. She will answer any of your questions, and what we hope to leave with tonight is the direction that you want for the width of the discontinuance, as well as any potential restrictions or uses you want to allow or disallow with this discontinuance. Because essentially we're getting rid of the public road. So the cars essentially aren't going to travel over it because we haven't maintained it forever. So if cars pass on it, they pass at their own risk. What we're asking though is the public easement portion, which we're keeping, the width of it, as well as the uses you'd like to see, and if you'd like to restrict any uses. And that's what we'd need. With those two items, we would draft a new order for discontinuance, share it with the abutters, and on the 28th, we would hold our first official public meeting on that discontinuance for Turkey Lane. So a lot of these have very specific definitions that are all legal. They're really not about abandoning or giving up any rights or any of that stuff. We heard loud and clear that you wanted to keep the public easement across there. But tonight we're hoping to get any specifics you have, or any, basically just, it's an open book. So I guess that's where we're going, and we'll turn it to you, and you can ask Alyssa any specific questions you have tonight as well.
Tom, can I ask?
George?
I'm just, I'm wondering why we're looking at this from Range Road to the bridge, and so what's the status of the bridge to where the paved portion of Turkey Lane ends?
That too is in a little bit of a different category. My concern with doing any type of discontinuance on that section is that we would put the last home in a state of non-conforming, because if we discontinue the public easement, we may discontinue the road frontage that they have along Turkey Lane, and that's the only reason, George.
Just curious,
If we continue, we could do the same thing on the other side, and perhaps at the same night do kind of some type of direction from the council to allow that to continue without any type of negative impact on the lot. And you've done those things before, but we didn't want to cloud this issue because that side's a little bit more complicated than this side.
Tom,
We haven't maintained either side.
Mike?
width was one of the questions, and what was the other?
The uses, Mike. What uses, if any, you'd like to restrict? And my question of the town attorney was, if we're silent on any restrictions, would it be appropriate to put a sign at the front saying, this is a public easement, we are no longer maintaining the road, pass at your own risk type of thing for vehicular notice? Because that's the one thing that concerns me. I don't want to send somebody down that doesn't have the appropriate vehicle. If you've been up there, you can see it's only 6 or 8 feet wide in the way it's been maintained, and it could be a little tricky coming back from the bridge.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how you want to handle those questions. Do you want to poll the council, or I think the easy one would be for us to handle the width at first, and get a feeling from the council if that's what you want to do.
Before we get there,
Yes.
can we ask the town attorney to describe exactly what a discontinuance is? And in the same, or preface that perhaps by telling us what we own, don't own, what we have there.
Sure, happy to. I guess I'll do it this way. So there are, as I see it, I think I would categorize this into 2 possible options. Currently, the town has what is known under Maine law as a townway. The town does not own the fee in the land, so the town does not own the title to the underlying property where Turkey Lane exists. The town has an interest in that land for the use of that property for the passage as a townway, which includes currently, to the extent it's possible, vehicular access, motorized access, pedestrian access, etc. there are the options with respect to a townway when it goes unused, whether it's not maintained, not built to a particular standard, not really passable by vehicles, over time, are twofold. One is to let the townway stand as it is today, make no affirmative designation with respect to the town's position regarding the status of that townway, and wait and see if a property owner brings it forward requesting that it be built to then current town standard for purposes of development, or to take the position that at that time the road has effectively been abandoned due to lack of use over a period of 30 years. That's one option with sort of two paths depending on what happens at the time. The second option is to make a decision at any point in time, which is before you now, to discontinue the road. At that, what happens, the effect of the discontinuance, is that you no longer have a town way used for highway purposes, for vehicular access. You can retain a public easement, and you can determine the types of uses over the public easement. In any case with a townway like Turkey Lane, where you don't own the underlying fee, the ownership or title to the land does not change. It's ultimately about the use of the land going forward, for both the abutters to that property and the public as a result of the town's decision. The discontinuance process, and we can talk about sort of the procedural steps, which is what the town manager was alluding to in terms of the decisions that need to be made tonight. If the council decides that it would like to pursue the discontinuance process, there are a number of decisions that have to be made prior to or at the outset of the process to make sure that we are satisfying the statute in that regard. But the sort of threshold question is, does the council wish to act to discontinue Turkey Lane as a townway at this point? As I've said, the alternative is waiting to see what happens with that, which could lead to a discussion about abandonment, could lead to a request to build the road to town standard at some point. So that in and of itself presents an unknown and a risk, whereas before you now there is certainly a case to be made for discontinuance along with the retention of a public easement. The terms on which that happens are the policy considerations for the council to discuss either this evening or in future meetings.
Bob? I want to follow up that. Does the public own the fee?
To Turkey Lane?
Right.
No.
Does the public have any interest in the rights of way?
The public has an easement for access to use and pass Turkey Lane as it currently stands as a townway.
If the town of Cumberland abandons this, the public loses their right?
If the town, and I don't mean to correct you, but I'm just going to stick with the legal terms. If the town discontinues Turkey Lane, the council has the option to retain a public easement and to determine how access can occur over that public easement, whether it's pedestrian only, whether it includes snowmobiles, ATVs, vehicles, etc. The ownership of the land, if the town discontinues the town way but maintains a public easement, the abutters have the right to claim the fee interest in the land to the center line of the easement. However, that land is still burdened by a public easement, so the public has the ability to access it depending on what the council determines they want the public to be able to do, and the abutters would require a license in order to, if they wanted to build the driveway or have additional access over that easement. So it's sort of layers of interest in the land.
If I try not to overwhelm everybody else, but if a developer came in and said, I want to develop the land, I have 66 feet of presumably right-of-way, can he in fact tear the existing bridge out and build a 2-lane highway across that 66 feet and continue through to Main Street.
Under which scenario? So if the town
Either
discontinued it?
scenario.
All right, if the town
If we do nothing,
if you do nothing, and a developer comes in and says, I wanna build
I
on
wanna
multiple
put,
lots and
40 house lots out
I need to
there.
access this. The options at that point are for the town to say, we consider this to be abandoned, and it's on you as the developer to build this road. Or or the developer pursues the avenue with the town of, no, we think this is a town way and you have to build it to town road standards in order to get us access. That's the discussion that happens with doing nothing at this point, down the road.
If we like the bucolic rural look as it exists today, what advice would you give us to preserve that?
Discontinuance results, depending on what the usage is, the town council decides for public access going forward. Discontinuance does not present a significant change to what exists today. The fee interest in the land, the abutters have the ability to claim the fee interest in the land to the center line, but the town retains public access across that area, across what exists as Turkey Lane today. The development potential under either scenario exists from my perspective. There is a way to develop that land, whether the town discontinues the road and retains a public easement. That exists under a license agreement with the current or future landowners. And the same is true if the town does nothing at this point, and it's a discussion at that point about who's responsible for that.
If the bridge abutments could be construed to be of historical nature, is there preservation rules that would fall into place?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that with specific regard to this bridge. One of the issues that needs to be addressed now is with respect to whether the bridge is part of this discontinuance or not. That's a decision point for the council in determining what section or segment of Turkey Lane gets discontinued. So I can certainly follow up with respect to historical value of the bridge if that's a concern.
I have no further questions.
Other questions? Ron?
I have one question. You stated that the town doesn't own the ground under the road. Is there any resident of the town of Cumberland that is being taxed on that property?
So likely right now, the property line goes to the right-of-way would be my guess in terms of how the lot lines are drawn on the assessing records, and that's what I've seen. I don't believe that that's any different. So the answer to that question, without looking specifically at the assessing maps, is likely no.
Okay.
It could, again, the current abutters have the ability to claim fee interest in that land to the center line of the road if the discontinuance process happens. So lot lines could change at that point for assessing purposes. However, that section of their land would continue to be burdened by a public easement, so it would be unlikely to have a significant change in value as a result, if any.
All right, thank you.
George?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm gonna preface a little bit. I was a little embarrassed that I didn't get over there sooner. I've been over on that property years ago, and I went over on the Range Road and walked in to the bridge, and then I walked up through the muck hole, which is the other side, and the steep embankment and so on, and back down, and I made 2 trips. And basically, I need the exercise anyway. But one of the things that occurs to me is that, let's assume for a moment that the discontinuance makes some sense. The discussion that I've heard leading up to this has been, we don't want to give up anything as far as the town's concerned based on a 66-foot wide right-of-way or a 66-foot wide easement. Anybody who walks down, including the side from Range Road to the bridge knows that the present use is about 8 feet wide, and that certain parts of that terrain are such that if you were going to insist on, if we were going to insist on 66 feet of right-of-way, about, I'm going to say at least 20 feet on either side of the right-of-way, or that's part of the outer side of the right-of-way, would never get used by the public. It just seems to me that we want to retain the right of the public to go down in there and fish. As far as I'm concerned, the question about vehicular traffic is asinine, because parking out on Range Road, if you want to go down there and fish, or if you want to go hunting or whatever, it doesn't take long to get down over that hill and down to the bridge. So what do we need this vehicular access, other than if there's a possibility somewhere down the road, some other council 40 years from now or whatever is going to want to put a throughway through there. I suppose that's an issue, but if they wanted to, they'd have to do a lot of moving of dirt around. So I guess I just don't see why this is all that complicated. That's in my mind, and I know other councilors feel differently, and I know a lot of people, there's a concern that a lot of people in town will be upset if the discontinuance takes place and there's a narrowing of the right-of-way. But there's no way of using more than 20 feet of that 66 feet anyway. So that's my diatribe.
Thanks, George. Allison, you have something?
Is there a, you mentioned if we did nothing in the abandonment, and you threw out like the 30 years, but is there actual legal, like, hey, if you hit X, Y, and Z, then it would hit, hey, you've officially abandoned the road, or is it more subjective?
Abandonment is 30 years, which is why I referenced
Okay.
that. So there's a very clear process with respect to discontinuance, because it's a sort of proactive measure. Abandonment is a bit more reactive, but there are standards in the statute with respect to at least, minimum elements that have to be proved, one of which is 30 years without use. There is a specific reference in the statute that any discussion like we're having now with regard to discontinuance can't be used as sort of a bar for a future claim for abandonment. However, that being said, future discussions in the context of this where, the town believes that it has been used certainly don't lend themselves to an argument for abandonment in the future.
Bob?
A couple more questions. Use of a right-of-way, use of a trail, use of a road, use of whatever we want to put our name to that, doesn't necessarily refer, correct me if I'm wrong, to a town's public expense of tax dollars to improve it. In other words, if a hiker uses that for 20 years, last 20 years, a cross-country skier skis across it, a snowmobiler has gone across that, that would indicate to me that there has been no discontinuance, no abandonment of said way. Am I correct?
I think that's generally true. I mean, the evidence of the use suggests
Even though tax dollars weren't spent?
that it's sort of a continuum of evidence, I guess is the way that I would describe that. I mean, to the extent that the town is spending tax dollars or is aware of the use or promotes the use or puts up signage to encourage the use or has it on a trail map, all of those things, depending on how much of that exists, from my perspective, would be used as evidence to demonstrate that the town understood and was aware of the level or degree to which the public was using the townway.
But not for vehicular access. That's the real distinction. We would have to bring it up to a certain level to allow vehiculars. We're required to. If you say this is a town way, then I have to expend monies to basically bring it to that standard that's required by state law, which I am desperately trying to avoid.
I got that point. I think we all got that point, so explain to me in real clear terms what a discontinuance is.
Discontinuance is giving up a town way, what is currently designated as a town way under state law, with an option to preserve a public easement. The public easement can include vehicular access, or it can be restricted to pedestrian only, or some other combination of pedestrian and other ATVs, snowmobiles, etc.
But that doesn't give us, that doesn't take away an option if later on we want to make that a complete way. 20 years from now, we want to open that road up.
If you want to do that in the future, you will need the land from the abutters, who will become the owners of that after you discontinue it. So it'd be very similar to the road acceptance process that the town undergoes now when you've got a new development that comes in and a new road gets built over land that a developer owns. And they come in and they give you a deed to that section of the road and ask the town to accept it. It's been theoretically built to standard, you agree, and then it's yours and you maintain it going forward. Under this scenario, the town doesn't own the land to begin with, so you're not giving that up necessarily. But if you wanted to own it in the future, you would be looking to the abutters or anybody who developed it or owned it in the future to make it an official town road and own the fee to the land. And it would, at that point likely be built. You'd require that it be built under your road acceptance ordinance today. You'd require that it be built at that point before you accepted it.
Shirley?
But right now, the abutters do not own the land under the right-of-way
They do.
until we discontinue.
So the abutters technically own the land under the right-of-way.
They do
It is
now.
a historical town way, which is an interest in the land. And
But they don't pay taxes on that.
They don't, because it's burdened by a public easement, and that has been in place since the 1800s.
But you said something like the lot lines would change from where they currently go to the easement to halfway across, so another 33 feet. So, 33 feet can add up to 3 or 4 acres in a hurry.
Except that it will continue to be burdened by a public easement. So it's not buildable land, it's not sort of extra acreage for the lot owners. The setbacks continue to be measured from the edge of
But
the
it
easement area.
does, but it is still acreage, and our taxes are done on acreage. I pay taxes on the acreage under my driveway, correct?
You do. Your driveway is not burdened by a public easement that the rest of the public can access, like a townway. That's the distinction here. That if this were just land that were serving only the lots off Turkey Lane as a private driveway and had no access by the public, it would be valued differently for assessing purposes
Okay.
than a piece of land that is also covered by an easement that the general public can use as well.
So if we went from 66 to 20 feet, though, that would be a change.
Yes.
Bob?
If the town does not own the land in fee, what mechanism of the law makes me have to spend public dollars because some abutter wants to drive on it?
To improve the road?
Right. Why is that burden not placed on the person who wants to use it? Explain to me why that I might have to spend public dollars on something I don't own.
So Turkey Lane was designated as a townway, which again, these are sort of imperfect terms because they don't help anybody understand the distinction between ownership and an easement. But ultimately, townway is a way that is passable by vehicles, in which the town has an interest but doesn't necessarily own the fee. Turkey Lane has been that since the early 1800s, and it has been used as such since that time. And a portion of it has since been improved. The segment of it that we're discussing now, it has in, for how many years, Bill, been closed for the winter for access, but never otherwise discontinued or deemed to be abandoned. And so the product of law that calls this into question is that a resident, developer, someone could come to the town and say, we believe that this in full has been a town way, that you haven't discontinued it, so you clearly believe that it's a town way, and that you need to build this road in order to make it passable. It's not a very strong claim, but it's a potential of a claim that the town has to defend. It's like, I think Bill's used this example, not unlike Harris Road.
I think that's very different. Harris Road is very different.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer, I'm not, but I would like to see more evidence that somebody could, Harris Road had a benefit to the public because it connected a throughway. Someone wanting to develop one end of Turkey Lane or the other end of Turkey Lane, there's no public benefit. Is there a distinction there?
I guess I don't view it the same. I mean, the road connects
Main Street.
two other primary arteries in town, potentially, and there's land to be developed. So I mean, I view it as similar to Harris Road for that very reason. There's development potential and connection potential between two roads.
So when we started this process, we started it out as a mutually agreeable discontinuance with the largest abutter that, you know, abuts both sides of it for the greatest extent. And that's why the 20-foot easement came into place, and that's why the uses that we described originally came into place. When the council basically said they weren't comfortable with that, it's kind of a do-over. And it's basically now we're looking for what is your comfort level with the discontinuance. If somebody tried to build on this, I would argue we abandoned it a long time ago, and we'd have to go to court and we'd have to fight that. What we were trying to do was avoid, you know, potentially a court situation where, you know, the courts would have to decide, you know, what is the status. I think we could successfully argue the abandoned road, but I would like to basically make it clear that we've discontinued it and what uses you'd like, so it's clear to everybody, the public as well as the abutters.
George?
I don't know whether I'm throwing something out here that's irrelevant, but the fact of the matter is that that way has been used for many moons by the public. And if the town if it wasn't a town way, through a prescriptive right over a period of time, the public would have the right to use that way from Range Road to the bridge at least, and probably up the other way. So we're not talking about whether we're going to retain the right of the public in Cumberland to go fishing down in that pond, or go hunting in there. The bottom line is, the public has a right. If the town had nothing to do with that property, the public has a right because they've been allowed to use it for all these years for purposes of ingress and egress to get to that pond. So the real question is the value of the width of the right-of-way, as far, of the easement that's going to be granted. Whether we're adamant that it's got to be 66 feet, and as I say, having walked the thing, and I think most of us have, it just seems to me that it's totally illogical. And now maybe something in the middle makes sense, but it's totally illogical to say that we need to retain the 66 feet of width, because it just, a good deal of it just wouldn't be usable anyway.
Just one.
Allison?
If we discontinue, does it still maintain the Turkey Lane? It's a green street sign. Does that still remain, or it would
No,
remove
I
it?
think we'd leave the entrance and we'd put the sign up at the beginning, as I talked about earlier,
That just
that it's no longer maintained as a town road, it's a public easement,
Okay.
that would allow a list of uses, or it would be silent on the uses if you chose not to restrict those. My interest is only to warn people that the
Right.
road isn't maintained and, you know, pass at your own risk type of thing.
Other questions of Alyssa? Ron?
Alyssa, cut and dry, in your professional opinion, if the town of Cumberland wants to keep 66-foot right-of-way and doesn't want to be responsible to improve the road, how do you word it? Which direction should we go in? The problem that I have, and it's probably the same thing that Bob has, we have a right-of-way up over Blueberry Hill. I don't know where the right-of-way is. I think I know where it is, but I have to drive across somebody's lawn, I believe, to get there. And it's the same way with Rangeway. And I'm afraid that if we narrow this up from 66 feet to 20 feet, and I want to drive down to the bridge, I'm going to drive across somebody's lawn. And I don't want that to happen. You know what I'm talking about on Blueberry Hill, Bob. You can't go over there without driving over somebody's lawn. And I don't want to see that happen with this. I mean, I don't necessarily think that it needs to be a thoroughfare all the way down through, but I wouldn't feel comfortable if I went down there tomorrow, and I didn't feel comfortable going in there a year ago before they torn the house down, because it literally was 30 feet off the side of the house. I mean, I felt like I was intruding on their privacy, even though I knew it was illegal right away. It just doesn't give you a warm feeling, that's all, and I don't want to lose that feeling. So, in your terms, how would we keep the 66-foot right-of-way and not have to maintain the road?
You can do that through the discontinuance. You
Okay.
can vote to discontinue the road and maintain a public easement of that width. And then, in addition, you can determine what uses you deem to be appropriate for that public easement area.
And
And it-
all we
and-
would have to do is just put up a sign, no vehicular traffic.
Sure, whatever the
Yeah.
uses are,
That's right.
you know, that's perhaps not even necessarily
Yeah,
required,
okay.
but a
All
good
right.
idea.
And if someone wanted to build a driveway on that, they would have to come to the town for a license for that driveway.
Yes, across the easement.
Bob?
Why do I have to describe or modify or constrain the use?
You don't?
You don't have to.
You don't.
It's up to you. That is your option as part of the discontinuance process.
The one piece of
Not
info.
everybody can get out of their car and walk down to the stream and drop a fly rod on. A lot of people have ambulatory problems, and so I'm very hesitant to limit vehicular traffic.
No. And, I mean, I don't want to stop vehicular traffic either, but I don't want to lose the 66-foot right-of-way.
No,
And
no,
I
nor
don't
do I.
wanna
I just
lose-
was,
I'm looking out for the town's greater good. I don't want to have to put $2 million in putting a road down through there either, so, but I don't want to lose the rights that we have today.
I'm comfortable not constraining
Right.
the future of the town of Cumberland. I'm comfortable going with the discontinuance.
So, and I am as well.
The one thing, that piece of information that you don't have in your packets tonight, the Lands and Conservation Commission last week voted to make a positive recommendation to you on the discontinuance. Their concern was, they voted to go with the 66-foot right-of-way for the width. They also asked that, as part of their recommendation, that any future license that comes before you would be separated so that it would not impact pedestrian access to the bridge. I explained that it might be virtually impossible to do that because the plateau that exists today is maybe 18 feet wide, and then it falls off in one direction and goes straight uphill in the other. Especially when you get to the hill that approaches the bridge. It looks like it was cut into the earth to basically flatten the slope out down to the bridge so it wasn't so steep. That would make it really challenging to kind of separate the two. Any license that you would grant would be still encumbered by the easement, and people would have the right to walk across that. What you do at that point maybe is improve the signage to basically make sure people know that there is still pedestrian access allowed to the bridge, but make the homeowner understand that this is an encumbered public easement. And I don't know what else they could do, Alyssa. I think the difficulty would be there's not enough room to have, two parallel trails, if you will, down to that bridge. I think signage is about all we could really do.
I went up through the one on Harris Road today. I mean, the Rangeway to Harris Road. And I got to the yard of the people who built their driveway on Rangeway. And it does come to a stone. They've got a pile of sawdust there. They've got another pile of sand. They've got some logs. I couldn't get through, but they were doing some work. So it wasn't an intentional obstruction. But it comes down and then it takes a very sharp turn. And so their driveway is very long, but their actual driveway that's on their land is very short. And we'd have to look at what that would look like, or future counselors or whoever would have to look at.
Thank you. Any other questions of the attorney? Melissa, thank you. You can hang in there because I'm sure there's going to be other things. I'd ask for any other public comment at this time. Paul?
Yep. Reality check on the ground is, as all of you sound like you do also. I and many others do use that mountain biking, going through there all the time. I'd love to see the continued use of that for walkers, fishermen and women, and bikers and walkers. So sounds like that's what everybody's looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, I'm going to close the public discussion, and I will ask for a motion. Bob?
I move to set a public hearing date of September 28th on the order of discontinuance as a townway, a portion of Turkey Lane from Range Road to the snowmobile bridge.
Second.
Got a second?
Yeah.
Can we get some more motion language?
Right. Kind of,
Ron,
yeah, I mean,
Mike?
I think what the majority of the council wants is 66-foot right-of-way. And it's gonna be in that, that's why I originally asked that question, Bob.
You want to include that in the motion?
yes, redo the
Yes.
motion, please.
I would remove the word portion out of that proposed motion, and I would add the words full 66-foot width.
No, I think we need with a 66-foot public easement at the end, right? That's what you want? Because the portion is saying Turkey Lane, from Range Road to Turkey Lane, with a 66-foot public easement over that. So it's just at the end.
So can you read the motion again?
I move to set a public hearing date of September 28th on the order of discontinuance of a townway, a full 66 width of Turkey Lane from Range Road to the snowmobile bridge.
Do we have a second?
And
Laura?
I'll go with a second again, but I think in our original, it was measured in rods. Should we state that, Bill, or just?
Four rods are 66 feet. It's
And that- okay.
accepted the same way.
Okay.
So,
So I
So
will
you
second
need
the
a second?
motion. Yep.
Okay. Further discussion?
just 1 second,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. There are also some elements here that Alyssa, and I'll let her read it. My question to you, Alyssa, since we are only setting the public hearing, do these elements also have to be included in their motion?
So the process for discontinuance is that the council holds a discussion about the terms of the discontinuance, which generally will give direction for us to draft an order of discontinuance that gets put on file with the clerk prior to the public hearing. The public hearing happens, and then there's another meeting 10 days later, not less than 10 days later, to actually vote on this. So it's sort of a three-step process. But for purposes of the order, the direction that we should have tonight from the council is not only the location and the width, but also whether there are any restrictions. Well, we've heard the discussion, but it would be good to have that on record clearly in terms of the vote, as well as whether there are any damages to be considered with respect to the order. We have to put that in the order and the notice to the abutters who have an interest in the abutting land. So those are things that would be helpful to include in this vote so that we can draft the order based on that.
What do you mean by damages?
Yeah.
You weren't very clear.
I think
There's
I got
no
this one, but I'm with Shirley. What do you mean damages?
Compensation to abutting landowners to the extent
I
that,
would-
I'm not suggesting, this is a requirement in the statute that the order specify whether damages are being awarded. Damages are considered with respect to the, how the property exists and how the property is used today, not potential future property, including potential future development that does not need to be considered. Damages are typically considered to the extent that property owners do not have access from any other point. That is not the case with the properties that are on Turkey Lane. Each has access from another road. And so usually that's the primary consideration. And I'm not suggesting that damages are necessary here, but it's a requirement of the statute for the council to consider whether it believes that there is any reason to award damages to any abutters in order to specify that in the order prior to the public hearing.
So it was the intention of the discussion that we would retain full rights as a discontinued way. We were not going to constrain ourselves by limiting it to just walkers. And that was the intent of my motion.
I just want to be clear for the record. We have to write a very detailed order, so I'm just looking for a motion that specifies those elements.
So I move to set a public hearing date of September 28th on the order of discontinuance as a town way, a portion of Turkey Lane from Range Road to the snowmobile bridge with a 66-foot public easement with no restriction on use and no damages ordered to abutters.
I will accept that amendment.
Thank you.
And there are
Do we have a
there are
second?
only two abutters. These are
Yes.
the two abutters that are shown here on the screen.
Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Ron? Further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda.
And that is just to set the public hearing
That's
date
correct.
for the
Yeah.
28th.
Right.
Correct.
Did we vote on the first motion? I mean,
It was
was
on
the
Rob's.
amendment.
It's all
It was
revised.
amended.
that was your amendment, okay,
Yeah.
all right, okay.
I think that's very specific and meets all four elements.
Okay, let's move on to item 20-066, to hold a public hearing to consider and act on the shellfish license allocations as recommended by the Shellfish Commission. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As has been the case in recent years, I think the order before you is to approve the same order that was last year, which was the unlimited licensed shellfish allocations, and then thereafter it kind of listed by separate categories. I think you have a letter in your packet from Mike Brown, the shellfish chair, and those basically the recreational unlimited licenses, 25 non-resident recreational licenses, 8 monthly resident licenses, 2 monthly non-resident licenses, 1 resident commercial license, and 1 non-resident commercial license. Those are required by law, especially the non-resident pieces, and those have been typically before you probably for almost the last 10 years. Our clam flats are still recovering from the green crab infestation, like many clam flats around us, and we don't have a huge rush on shellfish licenses anymore. It used to be very popular. We used to have great crabbing grounds, and unfortunately the crabs got to them, and we're hopeful that the cycle will change and we'll be back again. But we've worked very hard at getting those flats open. They've been open for several years now. We've done a much better job on pollution along the shore, so that's worked well. But unfortunately, we can't fight the little green crabs.
Further questions? Shirley?
On Labor Day weekend, a couple of my relatives, my husband and my brother, went down to Broad Cove and did some digging. And it was good digging. And I know, except that people should know that these are available. And now with Broad Cove open, you can have access to those Broad Cove flats. And I guess if I liked clams, or perhaps if I wasn't allergic to them, I wouldn't be talking, but they're very clean.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, further discussion? We have a motion? Shirley?
Sure. I move to approve the 2021 shellfish license allocations as recommended by the Shellfish Conservation Commission.
Do we have a second?
Second, Tom.
We do have
Mike
a
has a
public
second.
hearing as well, so I just want to make sure.
What's that?
We do have a public hearing in case there's any public comment.
Do we have any public here that wants to talk about it? I don't think so. Okay. Thank you. We have a motion, and it's been seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Unanimous, Brenda. Okay, finally, no, not finally, but to hear a report from the finance director reference fourth quarter 2020 financials, quarterly financials.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So, just to start off, we have the auditors here this week. Not that they're here physically, they'll be here just one day this week physically, but we have officially started our audit. And so these results are unaudited, and we'll hear at a later time from our auditors in regards to the final numbers. In total revenues, we ended the year being under budget by $225,000. In regards to our expenses, our controlled expenses, we were under budget overall by $113,000, and our fixed expenses, which include the insurance, our payment to the county and the school, and the capital reserve, we were over budget by $67,000, and so overall, we were $271,000 under budget. Here I've selected a few of our revenues. These are the ones that have the biggest impact to our general fund. The excise tax, we ended up exceeding our budget by $90,000, or 4% of the budget. Our state revenue share, we actually came in and did really, really well. We came in at $142,000 over budget. Back in March, they had restricted a lot of our revenues, so we were worried about not coming into budget, but in May, they actually brought back the revenue. It looks like they were just doing a holdback for temporarily until they could figure out what was going on with COVID. Our permits impact fees, we did exceed budget by $6,000. Our EMS billing, another revenue line that we thought was going to end up being under budget, ended up coming over budget. We ended up getting a big boost of accounts receivables at the very end that really helped with our revenues. Our Valhalla actually also came in over budget by $10,000, which is always nice to see. And for a change this year, and probably you understand why, our rec came in under budget by $278,000. As you know, in March, we had the stop of the before and after school program. Our summer school program, we usually start collecting our revenues right before the new fiscal year starts, where the summer camps start. So all of that didn't happen this year, so that was why we ended up with a loss this year. In regards to expenses, our biggest impact is, as you can see there, is public service and recreation. They came in under budget by 110,000 or 111,000. Rec came in also under by 68,000. Public service, a lot of their under budget was due to not having the overtime, their diesel fuel, and the expenses related to the athletic field and athletic fields, excuse me, and the water sewer is what helped bring that, maintain that budget under. And of course, in the net effect of rec not having the revenues, they didn't have the expenses, so that is a cause and effect from the COVID. So here on this slide is just a providing you with just the departments that went over. And just for the record, we also have the remaining departments actually came in under, and the total of under budget was 316,000. And so we're just showing you the overage because by charter is required for the council to allow for the budget that was under budget to make up for the departments that went over budget. This slide, I provided you this slide because I wanted you to see that despite what was going on, we do a tax collection. We send out bills the first week of August, and we also send out bills the first week of February. So, for our fiscal 2020 year, our tax collection was due for the second payment was due March 15th, which meant that's when everything like stops. And I just wanted you to see that despite with all the stopping that occurred around us, that we were still able to maintain our tax collection rate at the 99% mark that we've been always doing in the past. So this here now, we're going to talk strictly fund balance and how we ended the year. So when we ended the end of 2019, our fund balance was almost 2.5 million. So when we add in what we actually earned in our actual revenues and we take out what we spent, and we also have some reserve funding that is HR that we keep set aside, the senior rebate, this what we call the Circuit B, and the fuel fund and the main PERS credit that we had, which actually is zero now. When you add that all together, we show that our fund balance is going to increase by 915,000 over the prior year. So one of the two recommendations that we're bringing forward to you tonight also is to do an end of the year transfer for debt service and land acquisitions. And the reason why we're asking for the debt reserve amount is, if you remember, for 2021, what we decided to do is to make sure that our budget didn't exceed, or it stayed flat. So part of that action was we took in more of the debt reserve so that we can maintain our current expenses in the general fund. So we're trying to use some of that end of the year funding to make up for that so that we can preserve our debt service fund. And the second piece is for land acquisitions, because that is the account where we're using to pay for the Historical Society land move, or a building move, I apologize. But even with those two year-end transfers, we still end up with a almost $3.3 million ending fund balance, which would bring us to 10.5. At the end of last year, when we included the reserve accounts, our fund balance says 8.1, but in total we had 8.9. So we actually increased our fund balance despite all of everything that has occurred. And that's due to our town manager asking and bringing forward the department heads and telling them and explaining to them the situation that we were in, and having us to make sure we changed gears and make sure we prioritize what items we needed to get from March through June. So I know I only bring this up, usually I try not only to bring this once a year, but this is basically showing you that, and you can see right around here, where's my mouse, sorry. Right around here, you can see where we took a dip off down and started, you could see where that whole changing perspective on how the spending was going to happen occurred when we compare budget to actual. So the last thing I wanted to talk about when we talk about this last year as well is why do we save for fund balance? Why do we care about fund balance? And so this is what fund balance is pretty much like savings account, right? It's gonna help carry us into the following year. So I put at the top the almost $3 million that we are expected to have at year end. And then when you take into consideration what we plan on spending and what we plan on receiving before our tax payments start coming in, you'll see that we hit a negative deficit, which means that we're out of cash, right? So the whole idea is, and the reason why we want, we talk about maintaining that 12% fund balance is this is now what would happen if we had a 12% fund balance. Now you can see that instead we have $187,000 to carry us until the actual tax payments come in at for the first in August. So right now, what we're left in order to get from the 10.5% to the 12% fund balance, you're looking at an additional $480,000 that we have to put into our fund balance. But we're getting there because we have increased over the last 2 years. We have increased our fund balance from the prior year. So that's all I have. Any
Mike?
questions?
A couple things. When are the taxes due for the viewing public?
When are the taxes due? The taxes are due August 15th and March 15th.
September
15th. I
September
apologize.
15th.
I'm sorry. August
People are
is
gonna have
when
heart
we
failure at home.
I apologize. So they're actually due tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes.
Am I reading this right? Are we in the hole with Valhalla about $180,000 a year? Is that fair?
That's a fair statement.
Okay. No, that's all I
Yeah.
have.
Other questions? Ron?
As I said earlier, what would Bill do? I think Bill Stiles would be proud of this. I mean, we're actually on our way to the 12%. I mean, and we're getting closer every year. So, I mean, kudos to the manager and you. You've done a really good job in a tough year, so.
Thank you.
Bob?
I just follow up with that too, Ronnie, and I meant to jump in before you got that, but I think there's a Staff Appreciation Day Thursday, and I probably won't be able to get there, but I certainly will add my shout out to the real big effort by the town to, I remember back in March when the Finance Committee got together and we cut $1 million out of our budget going ahead. And there was a lot of concern certainly on the Finance Committee's part about where we would land at the end of this year. And so I think, publicly, I'm appreciative of the efforts that went in to get us there and by every staff person, every employee of the town. And I'll remind the public that we had a contract talks that basically we froze and asked people not to take raises, and so there's been a heavy lifting on everybody's part. And anyways, thank you. So my one question is, and I'm not sure that you might have an answer to this. When we talk about that fund balance of getting to the 12%, how do we compare with the communities around us? Is there any way of knowing?
Yarmouth is very close to us. Falmouth is probably closer to 20%. They do have a much larger fund balance. They've always carried a pretty large fund balance. 16%, if you remember, back a few years ago, that was our goal to get to 16. We, at that time, felt that was a long reach, and because we knew we had some bonding coming up, we wanted to show that maybe 12% was more attainable, and probably by the end of next year we'll be at 12%, and we can look at maybe moving the target a little further away. 16% is typically what towns are looking to achieve. So we're definitely in the ballpark.
Other questions?
The rest of your packet includes the financial information in more detail, so if you have any questions with that, I'll be happy to answer anything for you. I also included in there a 5-year collection rate, year-to-date, as far as where we are right now. And that just shows that for 2021, we're showing very strong collection rates as well. So I just wanted you to see that as well, that we're, our property taxes or collections doing very well this year.
We're about $1 million ahead of where we normally are at this time, and we're about $50,000 ahead of excise tax again. So the revenues are very strong right now.
Further questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Terrific. Appreciate it.
We will need 2 motions with this next item, and they all relate to the information you just heard.
Okay, the next item is to hold a public hearing to authorize the town manager to transfer inter-departmental operating funds for 2020 as recommended by the Finance Committee. Mr. Town Manager?
As you heard from our finance director, we're looking for your authorization tonight to transfer excess operating funds to those budgets that fell short. Also, those budgets before you also included the COVID expenses that we incurred over, the last quarter of the year, which is about $80,000. But those are already included in those budgets. We separate those out in case at some time federal funds are available and we could apply for those. It's easy to, we've tagged them all. So that was one thing, and then the second item we're looking for is a transfer as recommended to property acquisition reserve and to debt service reserve as well. So those were the 2 motions that our finance director was requesting from you tonight, and those were supported by the Finance Committee.
Further discussions? Do we have a motion? Bob?
I move to authorize the town manager to transfer excess end-of-year operating revenues and interdepartmental operating balances to close out all department budgets for fiscal year 2020 as recommended by the Finance Committee.
Second.
We got a second from Allison. Further discussion? All in favor? Thank you.
And I would also move the next one.
Yep, we have to do that one too.
I move to authorize the town manager to transfer up to $115,000 from end-of-year excess revenues for projects approved by the Finance Committee, and that any additional excess revenues be applied to end-of-year fund balance.
Second.
Second by George. All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you. Thank you. Bob, thank you. The next is to consider and act on setting October 12th through the 16th as bulky item pickup week.
So moved.
Second? Do we have a second? Shirley?
Sure. You had the motion,
Yes.
and I'll second.
Okay. All in
But
favor?
I would also like to remind people that if you don't want to wait, I have 2 things.
Okay.
If you don't want to wait, Riverside is open. Like I had a sofa that I didn't want to hold on to and get waterlogged, so it went to Riverside.
Mhm.
Riverside is not a Portland facility, it's a regional facility, so anyone can go there and take waste. And the other thing, this week we got something, I think we got something, I don't know if we all got something, about our our recycle contamination levels are up. So folks, in the viewing public, those Hannaford bags and those Shaw's bags are contaminating our recycle trash. Do not put them in there. If we have a percentage rate over 5% contamination, it costs us $36 per ton extra money to recycle. So please update yourselves on what can be recycled and what can't be recycled. That's my little
Eco Maine
soapbox
has a
for
great
tonight.
website.
They sure do.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a motion and it was seconded. All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Okay, the next item is 20-070 to request and to request a recommendation for the sale of town-owned property located at 4 Blanchard Road from the Lands and Conservation Commission. Mr. Town Manager?
Well, this started 2 years ago with the Finance Committee when we went out for an appraisal on the land where the former Historical Society sat. It now sits elevated over a new foundation behind the library. At the time, we were working with CV and Mahar, which we are still, a local engineering company, to keep them in Cumberland. They are looking to expand their operations, and this would be very helpful to them. At the time, we agreed on the appraised value of the land. I think it was $88,000. It's been several years now, so when we came back to the table, I asked they also include $12,000 of engineering fees that we could use for town purposes, and they agreed to that. So tonight, I'm basically looking for you to send this, as with all town property, your new ordinance requires a recommendation from the Lands and Conservation Commission before you act. So that's where this would go, and it would come back before you for a actual town action on October 12th.
Thank you. Discussion? Do we have a motion?
I'll give you one, Tom.
Thanks, George.
I move to send to the Lands and Conservation Commission for a recommendation the sale of town-owned property located at 4 Blanchard Road as recommended by the Finance Committee in 2019.
Thanks, George. We have a second?
I'll say.
Second.
Ron, second. Further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. The next item is to set a public hearing date of September 28th to consider and act on accepting a portion of Red Mill Way as a public road as recommended by the Lands and Conservation Commission. Mr. Town Manager?
This is more of a housekeeping exercise. Red Mill Way, there was a portion that ended between Winterberry and Linden Court and Hawthorne Court that kind of got lost in the transfer and some of the exercises the town went through to acquire the land on Hawthorne Court. We never formally accepted a very small section of Red Mill Way. That was found when I was working with David Young from the Homeowners Association. We found that was left in no man's land, and we never accepted that portion of road. We've been maintaining it, paving it, digging it up, doing all kinds of things to it. They don't want the road, obviously, so this is just more of a housekeeping exercises. Their board voted on it and approved this to go forward. We had to get their vote, and the Lands and Conservation Commission also recommended unanimously to move it forward to you. So we're requesting a public hearing date of the 28th.
So if we don't,
Any
we're gonna
discussion?
lift up the plow when we go over that section and then put it back.
Put a
down
toll
on
gate
the
up
other
again.
side.
We'll get the gates up on both sides.
Any other discussion? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Shirley. Second? Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, George. All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you. The next item is to set a public hearing date of September 28th to consider and act on amendments to Chapter 315, 315, zoning, Section 21, Town Center District, B12, daycare center and nursery, to increase the number of children from 20 allowed from 20 to
28.
20 to 28 as recommended by the planning board. Discussion? Shirley?
Yes, I'll take this from, ordinance reviewed this with, it was a request by the Congregational Church and the daycare there to expand it to 28. They are trying to work with this hybrid model of students, some attending on Mondays and Tuesdays, and some attending on Thursdays and Fridays, and Wednesdays is a problematic day for them because of the overlap in the number of kids. My big question was why 28? You know, it seems sort of an arbitrary number, but that is what this state has determined they have space for, and the licensing for the state.
Good point.
So, you know, I think it was a no-brainer for the ordinance committee because, you know, who are we to overrule the state?
That's right.
Well, if the state says jump off the bridge, let's all get in line.
Right after you, Bob.
I'll make it a motion,
Thanks.
if you're ready.
Thanks.
I move to set a public hearing date of September 28th to consider and act on amendments to Chapter 315, which is zoning, Section 21, Town Center District, B-12 daycare centers and nursery schools, to increase the number of children allowed from 20 to 28 as recommended by the planning board.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Allison, second. Further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. The next item is to set a public hearing date of September 28th to consider an act on adding a residential solar energy farm system to the Cumberland Code as recommended by the Ordinance Committee. Mr. Town Manager?
I will share, I'll basically punt this to Counselor Story King, but you didn't get a letter that came in the packet. I think Brenda maybe put it before you from the Sierra Club that lists some of the items that the Ordinance Committee has not considered yet. And the Ordinance Committee was still waiting for word back from the town attorney related to language about the prohibition in the front yard. And that was to make sure it was consistent with state law. So we don't have that language back yet, nor has the Ordinance Committee seen that letter from the Sierra Club that's in front of you. So tonight is basically the first time they've seen that. And 2 weeks, within 2 weeks, we hope to have something back before you so that we can address those issues as well. But Shirley can go over on how we got to where we got to, because I thought she did a lot of good work to get there.
So
Shirley,
we
wanna
were
take it?
approached by a citizen in a new development who wants to put a solar array on their property. And due to an absence of any guidance in the codes, it was required that this solar array be set back an unreasonable amount of, well, my opinion. It had to be set back further than a shed, for example. And that didn't seem to make a lot of sense, that you would have to set it back that far. So I did a little research and I went in and I first found some Maine state laws that govern us in what we can do about solar energy, and there's not a lot that we can do about restricting solar energy. I think the state wants to encourage solar energy, and I think if we looked at it, we would want to encourage solar energy as well. So I did a little more digging for towns that have solar ordinances, and not many do. I found one in South Portland, but it included a lot of commercial and a lot of language that wouldn't be appropriate for Cumberland, Maine. I did find an ordinance, a very thorough 65-page ordinance or something like that in Belfast that had gone through 3 public hearings, had a lot of language on it that was also inappropriate for Cumberland, given the amount of commercial use that they have. We were really looking for residential use. So then we started looking at where in our ordinances would we put this? Do we put it with setbacks? Or do we put it as, where you can put a shed, where you can put a chicken house, where you can, no, none of that really made sense. So Bill came up with the idea, well, we have the ordinance, a standalone ordinance for the windmills. Let's go with a standalone ordinance for solar arrays. It makes more sense. It makes sense because mirrors the windmill ordinance. It makes sense because with advancing technology, it is more easily modified and updated. And it makes sense because it doesn't have to go through this timely process of sending it to the planning board for them to stamp it for us when we are looking at people who want to install solar panels for tax benefits. There's a 26% tax benefit to installing these panels this year and a 22% or 24% benefit in 22% for installing them next year. So that's the process with how we got to this ordinance. I hadn't seen this. I mean, no one's really in super favor of having, a big solar array on the front lawn aesthetically. We talked a little bit about aesthetics. We all may need to, as technology comes along, modify our view of what is aesthetically pleasing. And I don't know how many houses you've built that you haven't aesthetically liked, but,
None.
None.
I don't build houses that aren't aesthetically pleasing.
Excellent. But some people with their properties, the way they're situated, may not have a lot of options, so we're trying to, meet the needs of everyone. So, that's where we are and how we got here.
Thank you. Good work.
I think the issue too is that you have the flexibility as a council to take it up in a council meeting, and if it's, we put some numbers in there that there wasn't a lot of science to, it was a best guess. And we're hoping through the public hearing process, we can get feedback, and then the council has the ability to change, modify, do whatever they'd like to the ordinance without having to go through, 3 planning board meetings and trying to get back to you.
Back and forth.
Yeah, so that ping pong match kind of stops here. It stops with you, and you can get feedback on right, wrong, or indifferent. Like we can have an ordinance committee meeting before the next council meeting to talk about some changes you might want to see. I think there are some folks tonight that want to talk to you about some of those ordinances as well.
Tom,
George?
just to follow up on what Shirley said, we talked quite a bit about the aesthetic that's coming down the road, and the bottom line is that the view, the balancing of the desirability of solar energy, and as a council, our view of the aesthetics of having a solar array in the front yard, or whether it should be 900 square feet allowed, or 700 or 1,000, the more you think about it, the more the evolution is going in a direction where people don't want us coming up with aesthetic conclusions about where they can do what with energy efforts that are positive, given the global warming situation and everything else. I think everybody who hasn't been living under a rock knows we better sit up and take notice.
Thanks, George. Public hearing? Anybody from the public? Paul?
That was nice to hear. Can you hear me? Sorry about the mask. Yeah, I just regarding this.
You can take the mask off when you're up there.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Just so you understand, typically when things prior to going to a public hearing, you confirm that the proposal, even if it's may change in number, it meets state requirements. And I've gone through this solar proposal. I am a resident that has a fully solar, heated, electrified, and hot water and everything solar in my house. Drive 2 electric cars. I'm also a solar professional. That is my job. I install systems, and I do it in Cumberland. My company has dozens of installs in the town, along with many other towns. One recommendation is that you, maybe working with the committee, include several of the companies that do installations, because they have a pretty in-depth knowledge of the regulations, requirements, and also what people generally want and what they've installed prior to writing an ordinance. And I know it's difficult, and I appreciate, Shirley, what you said, because I helped write the wind ordinance for the town of Cumberland. And I think there were good intentions when it was initially written, but the restrictions were so excessive that it would make it almost impossible to put in a windmill. We don't have a very big wind resource here, but as you know, there was one gentleman that did put in a windmill after that ordinance was written, and I feel happy every day I ride my bike by it to see that thing going. But specifically, I'm not going to get into every part of this, but I've gone through multiple sections of it, and it does not comply with the current state laws. And they were written very broadly and specifically for that reason. It's Maine Title 33, Chapter 28-A is a very broad language about solar installations, and it really prohibits entities such as towns from restricting solar installation. There are some exceptions to that for wetlands and some very specific safety requirements, but you know, having just quickly read through this, it does not comply with state law on multiple accounts, not just that front area setback, but it's quite restrictive. And during a public session, I'm glad to give my input on points of it, but just the point being right now on multiple parts from what I can read, and others have read this, it doesn't agree with that those prohibitions. These prohibitions don't meet state requirements. This state law that was passed was specifically meant to reduce restrictions, and from what I can read of the ordinance, it puts a pretty onerous burden of more restrictions, higher costs to the person that's putting the system in, and a reduced limitation on the size and therefore the energy input of what's being built. So I was really happy to hear the support of solar, and I think this can be improved significantly. I'm also curious because it's very duplicative of the process that we have today, which is building permits, electrical permits, both of which have to be complied with fully. And this is a sort of restating and adding another layer to that. It also adds a longer time frame for approvals. And I will say in the past that Bill Longley has been fantastic with how quickly he turns around permits and applications and gets them out so commercial installers can get systems going. And also he's fantastic, and his staff is really fantastic on approval of when they're finished with the projects, and the licensed electrician has written and signed off on it. So this seems like a very a long period of time for approval. You've also pushed a lot of the cost and burdens about hiring professionals to the homeowner, which I don't think is very fair. And I just don't believe that in several instances, including the size of the system, the height restrictions, the land setback restrictions, comply with the Maine state law. So I think before going to a public comment period, you would want to have your proposals at minimum meeting Maine state law. That's separate from people's input on how they feel about it. So I would suggest that you make sure that it absolutely, there's no question that it meets state law, because that supersedes Cumberland town law. And prior to doing a public hearing, in the public hearing, then you would get the input based upon a legal, potentially legal ordinance. Otherwise, it would be very confusing to the public to have a whole bunch of proposals that wouldn't meet state standards.
Thank you. Can I respond to Paul?
Shirley?
Yeah, Paul, we took a lot of this language directly from Belfast, and they have worked on this for a long time, and they've had 3 public hearings on it before they actually passed it. And I did sort of go back and forth with the state, look at the state law. And one of the reasons we are doing this is to make it less restrictive than our building code. And if we do nothing, then the code enforcement officer has to follow the code enforcement rules, which would be for a structure, unless it's a shed. So the setback requirements for a shed are smaller than other structures. So we'll take a look at that again, I'm sure. The other thing I wanted to point out, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought here.
There's also some items that don't purport to be in the purpose of the law. If you read what the purpose that your own ordinance wrote, restricting size of systems and heights, those are not really the public health, safety, and welfare. And
Right.
that's an odd
And I think
kind of
that's something
piece of-
where, in a public hearing, we would find out, we were not sure what size system you would need for a single residence. We are not interested in people putting up systems that, just for the intent of selling back the power to the power grid. We want an ordinance that encourages residential solar arrays, not someone who says, oh, I'm gonna, put in twice the size of an array that I need, so then I can sell it back, and then make my cost back. So,
I mean, not to get into the weeds on this, but two comments are, A, the systems currently, you cannot make a profit by selling money back, so all the systems that are put in are typically sized to what the user, the resident, needs, because it would be like throwing money away. But also, there is a question as to what if they want to make it a little bit bigger? Why is that the purview of the town to restrict that necessarily?
Well, that's where, we weren't sure that,
Yeah.
what the ordinary size would be for.
Yeah, sure.
We did go back and forth with that one a little bit.
Well, I mean, there's probably 8 to 10 companies that have incredible expertise in this area, more than myself even. And, they can give you data based upon, just our company alone's done hundreds of installs. There's 8 or 10 other companies that are doing the same thing every day. So we would be able to tell you in real numbers what people have done over the last number of years, and as technology has changed, what people are doing,
Okay.
and probably
Maybe you
help
can
on that.
maybe you can share some of that with me directly.
Sure,
Through
be
my
happy
town
to,
council
yeah.
email. But while you were talking, I did remember the other thing about permitting was, Bill Longley gave us he was in our ordinance meeting and gave us this advice. And yes, he does turn things over, and he does not ever expect it needing to go 30 days, but things come up. He was out on a medical leave of absence at one point, so, and he does occasionally, not very often, take vacations. So the 30 days gave him some flexibility. Not that that's the
Sure.
way we do business in Cumberland, but that was his recommendation for permitting. That's why the length of the 10 days and 30 days are there.
Yeah, and
He said it's usually more like 4 or 5 days.
I believe me, I have nothing but praise for his job and what he's done.
So I just didn't want him to not go defended on that.
No, absolutely not. There's also some language in here regarding certifications versus licensed professionals, and what is a requirement. So you might want to look at that, because there are certifying agencies that are national agencies, and there's also state licenses, like licensed electricians who work for solar companies. There's a national certification for solar, but I think it's not clear in number 8, section B. There's a difference between licensed and professional, and so having a certified plan, I guess can be some clarification on that. But I'm glad to hear that, you are trying to make it as flexible and as straightforward and least restrictive as possible, because as it's written now, there are some things that are good, but I also see some really red flags as restrictions, and I agree with what was said regarding the promotion of this. It's really something that we need to be doing, doubling down on it. It's the future. I mean, just in the short period of time that I've done this as my profession, the technology has changed light years, and every month we're getting in newer technology, more efficient, different smaller sizes, etc. So it is changing dramatically. It's great to see. I mean, I think one of the great side informations of the town is how many people are doing this and what they're doing. It's amazing. It's really remarkable.
Paul, I'd like to ask you a question. In a relative way, can you give us some kind of a definitive idea of how much progress has been made on the duration of life of a solar panel? Let's compared to, say, 10 years ago. Is there an appreciable difference?
The big differences that are happening now are in the size of the solar panels. And they're actually wattage per square foot or inch. So they're making panels that are much more efficient. They're producing more energy for the same size. So literally every month, you know, the industry's around 380 watts per panel. You can get some over 400. That number just keeps bumping up, and the price is staying relatively the same. As far as longevity of panels, almost all the standards of the company are 25-year warranty, but that doesn't mean the panel doesn't stop producing at 25 years. It's usually around 80-90% its production at 25 years. The panels produced back in the 70s, many of them are still existing. They just slightly degrade after time. So, you know, we say a panel's life is in the 40 plus 45-year range, but I have some panels literally from the 70s that still work. They just are producing a little less energy, and they are improving that also. One thing that's not in this ordinance that I think might be, you know, as a technology, it's going to go through the cracks of this, is we now have what's called bifacial panels. So, you know, you're getting electricity not just on one side, but on the back side also. So in a ground-mounted array, you actually can get sunshine or reflective light powering the back of your panel. So that may be in the future used, and it is being used right now, as fencing on people's properties. There's some large-scale agricultural areas that have fencing. And so that's not addressed in this ordinance, but it's just hitting, the technology's just hitting, and it's available commercially today, and they're starting to use it, even for awnings, for porches and decks, so some translucent panels. So there's technologies that are changing that. And then this also doesn't necessarily address, you know, you might have heard of the Tesla tile panels, which are actual roof tiles, and can be used on roofing and siding. So this doesn't really address that, and it might be something that needs to be thought of, because if you put restrictions in on an amount and they fill up the roof with tiles, you might be way over what the ordinance says. So
We got some guidance from Bill on that, and that's one reason we, sorry. One reason we went with a standalone ordinance is so that we can update it more easily. But Bill Longley was saying that there are some fire, you have to look at this ordinance and other fire ordinances, and those are referenced in here for like percentages of roofs that can be covered or not covered. And, you know, we just bought a brand new beautiful fire truck, so our firefighters don't have to go on the roofs, but the law still exists that they have to be able to go on the roofs. So I thank you for your input, Paul. I would, at this point, suggest you maybe send some of your specific points to me, and I'll run them by Bill, or do some more research and again, I'm sure you'll be here for the public hearing in a
I'll try to be.
couple of weeks.
I appreciate the work. It's hard when you have something that exists, and you know, these things do change very quickly, and you can't necessarily go on certain towns because, for example, Brunswick was found in violation. They passed an ordinance prior to the most recent law being passed, and that was in violation of state law, so they had to repeal it, which was good because it was a very restrictive piece of it on taxation. So, yeah, things are changing quick, and I'm glad you have. It seems like a very progressive attitude on what I think is the future of energy. Thank you.
Thank you,
Paul,
Paul.
thank you very much. Anybody else from the public? Further discussion from the council?
I've read the fire piece of it, and I would be very careful about implementing that, because I think there's a lot of faults in it, particularly from a building and construction point of view. If I was going on a roof, I would stomp my way up through the glass panels long before I'd ever put my foot on the asphalt, because the roofing bars that the panels are attached to every 4 feet, it's really not, in my opinion, it's not written well, and it doesn't take into account what is put on the roof there.
Yeah,
And the
there are
electrical
not many
piece of it,
firefighters who want to go onto
you
these
know,
roofs.
CMP will not turn this thing on until they've inspected it.
Right.
So some of it is kind of, it's unnecessary language, but, you know, I think that we're headed in the right direction.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, there was sometimes sensitivity to it, but it really reflected more with December 31st than it did with, September 31st. So if we want to wait 2 additional weeks to get more review from the town attorney and some input from some other energy companies, I don't think that would hurt anything. It'd give the ordinance committee a little bit more time to look at this. So if we push this to October 12th, I think we would have enough time to turn it around and get some more information back to the ordinance committee.
I agree.
Yeah.
Whatever's your pleasure.
Do we have a motion? Ron?
Mr. Chairman, I'll give you a motion. I move to set a public hearing date of October 12th to consider an act on adding residential solar energy system ordinance, chapter 232 to the Cumberland Code as recommended by the ordinance committee.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Bob, second. Further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, Brenda. Thank you. Okay, let's go to new business. Mike?
All set.
Thanks, Mike. Shirley?
Mine only new business was the reminder about the trash. So, and I worked that in already, so.
You did,
I'm all
thank
set.
you. Good job. Bob?
Nothing.
I just have a couple things. The food pantry continues to do so much for our community. Again, much thanks to the number of volunteers that give so much of their time and compassion to our customers each week. We have served over 1,500 families to date. Planning Board meets tomorrow night, and looking forward to the employee recognition luncheon this coming Thursday. And a reminder that the town hall will be closed in the afternoon. That's all I have.
I just,
Allison?
as most know, school started last week, and as a parent of a school-aged child, I just wanted to give a huge shout-out to Peter Bingham and his team, who, through all of this, scrambled and in very great collaboration with our North Yarmouth partners in getting us access to the new West Custigo Hall, have care on the full days and being able to swap, and it is a lifesaver. And I know that was not easy to finagle and figure out as rules were changing every week. And so just a huge shout out to them and all the work they did, and many families are eternally grateful. So thank you.
Thanks, Allison. George?
Just one thing, I have a neighbor who's in her mid-80s, and I've been conscious of the fact that she just lost her husband recently. And there are a lot of people in that age group who aren't obviously savvy as far as technology is concerned. They're not looking at the town website. In many cases, and I know Tom's very familiar with this, they're reticent about asking for any help because they're Mainers. And if they've lived here a long time, they have a tendency to reflect that mentality that says, I don't need help, but oftentimes they do. And it was just brought to mind recently because she came to the town office and had done her thing as far as absentee voting was concerned, and she got confused about the availability of certain things. And I just think if there's any improvement we can make to the communication with elders who are not part of the technology era, it's important to do that. And one of the first things, of course, is if they will just ask somebody to go and get their groceries and so on. Once they hook up with somebody like that, then a lot of these other concerns that wouldn't be concerns to us wouldn't arise, because the person getting their groceries would realize they have other issues. But I just think we need to focus on those folks a little more than we do maybe sometimes.
Thank you, George. Good comments. Ron?
Allison and I are gonna work on that, so. Just a couple other things. At 5:45 tonight, we had a little farewell gathering for Bill Stiles, very well attended, and it was great to see him and a bunch of the elders from our town. Holland Story was here tonight, which we haven't all seen in a long time. Looked like he's doing pretty well. And he left $20 here for the food pantry, so I wanna thank Holland for that. Another friend of mine that has been a very good donator, Dean, left another $20. Bob Vale was up and got a sticker on
Jeez.
Saturday, and he left another
Stop
$20.
that.
And here's my $20. The 4-H auction is still going to go on, even though the Cumberland Fair is not gonna go on. All of this money is going to that. It not only benefits the food pantry, but it benefits the children who have raised animals, that have spent their money all over the summer. Now there's none of these fairs all over the state, and I mean, picture yourself being a 13-year-old raising a beef critter, not knowing what you're gonna do with it at the end of the season. So I'm hoping this auction is a huge success, I really do, and I think it will be, because they've really done a good job advertising, and I just want everybody to donate, and I appreciate those that have. Bob, thank you. And that's all I have. Thanks, Ron. I have my $25 here.
Jeez.
Perfect,
Okay.
thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Oh, you guys are killing me.
Mr. Town Manager, do you have anything else?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Brenda, you have anything? We have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
I'll second.
Thanks. All in favor? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good night,
Come on.
everybody.